How long has she been sitting there? Commander Rithais asked the question without lowering his field scope. His voice carried the particular flatness of a Kalori officer who already knew the answer would irritate him. Behind him, 3 members of his security detail stood in the observation corridor's blue-white light, their sidearms holstered, their crestridges elevated in the involuntary threat posture that meant something on the other side of the glass was making their hindbrain scream. On the other side of the glass, Dr. Linnea Voss sat cross-legged on frozen volcanic rock, 2 meters from a Daggermaw Alpha. 14 hours, said Dr. Ian Sareth, the Kalori xenobiologist assigned to the research station. She did not look up from her data terminal. She arrived at the observation blind at 300. The Alpha emerged from the pack den at 340. She has not moved since. And the Alpha also has not moved. Rithais lowered his scope. The glass that separated the observation corridor from the external terraces was rated for Category 7 ballistic impact. It would not stop a Daggermaw. The engineers who had designed this station had been very clear about that in the briefing materials he had read on the transport up. The glass would slow one down. It would not stop it. The distinction, they had noted with the cheerful honesty of people who did not have to live behind their own product, was approximately 4 seconds. Dr. Sareth, why is there an unarmed human female sitting 2 meters from a creature that can bite through ship hull plating? Because she is studying them. She is going to be eaten by them. That is a possibility I have raised 17 times. Sareth's secondary hands the Kalori had 4, the upper pair for fine work, the lower for stability tapped a data sequence into her terminal. She has a clipboard. Rithais stared at her. A physical clipboard, Sareth continued. Paper, a writing implement. She records observations by hand. She says the sound of digital recording equipment agitates the pack. The sound. Yes. Rithais turned back to the glass. Below the corridor, the research station's exterior terraces descended in broad stone steps to the edge of a volcanic ridgeline that dropped away into a valley so deep, and so choked with mist that the bottom was not visible from any angle the station offered. The planet was called Verath 4. The Kalori Science Ministry had established the research outpost here 6 years ago to study the only known population of Daggermaw, a Category 9 apex pack predator, endemic to the volcanic highlands, numbering fewer than 80 individuals across 3 pack territories. The Daggermaw Alpha was 7 meters long from skull to tail, built low and dense like something designed to move through narrow volcanic fissures at speed. Its hide was the color of cooled basalt, matte black, with veins of dark red, where thermal venting from the volcanic substrate kept its blood temperature elevated above the ambient air. Its skull was broad and flat, armored with a fused plate of bone that extended from the brow ridge to the base of the neck, and its jaws, the feature that had earned the species its name, were hinged at 2 points, allowing them to open to an angle that the station's biomechanics team had measured at 140 degrees. The teeth were not teeth in any functional sense. They were shearing blades, triangular, serrated, designed to close once and separate whatever was between them from whatever it had been attached to. The species was social. It hunted in coordinated packs of 8 to 14. It communicated through subsonic vocalization that the station's equipment could detect at ranges up to 4 kilometers. During the mining era that had stripped Verath 4 highlands bare, the Daggermaw had been hunted nearly to extinction not for sport, but because a single pack had killed 47 miners in a 6-month period after the mining grid expanded into their denning territory. The Kalori had responded with an eradication campaign. When it was over, fewer than 80 Daggermaw remained across the entire planet, scattered in 3 highland territories that the Science Ministry had quietly cordoned off and declared research preserves, not out of conscience, but because a species that had killed 47 armed miners in 6 months was considered worth studying from a safe distance. And one of them was sitting 2 meters from a human woman with a clipboard, and it was not killing her. Rithais had been sent to Vareth 4 to solve a problem. The problem was not the Daggermaw. The problem was the human. Linnea Voss had arrived at the research station 9 months ago. The details of how a human behavioral ecologist from a planet called Earth had ended up on a Kalori volcanic research outpost studying an alien apex predator were, in Rithais' experience, the kind of administrative story that made sense only if you did not look at it too carefully. The Kalori Frontier Bureau had approved a cross-species research grant. The grant had been filed under xenofaunal behavioral observation, non-interventionist methodology. The human's credentials listed 22 years of fieldwork with what Earth's taxonomic databases classified as great apes, large, social, tool-using primates found in the equatorial forests of her homeworld. The grant committee had reviewed her application, noted her published work on non-invasive proximity habituation, the practice of sitting near wild animals for extended periods until they stopped treating the observer as a threat, and approved her placement at a Category 9 research station, where the nearest qualified medical facility was a 14-hour shuttle flight away. The committee had approved her, Rithais suspected, because nobody on it had believed she would actually go through with it. A human researcher studying Category 9 predators from inside their territory was a theoretical curiosity in a grant proposal. It was a liability event in practice. The approval had come with a rider noting that the ministry accepted no responsibility for outcomes resulting from the researcher's chosen methodology. The rider had been written in the particular dialect of bureaucratic language that means, "If you die, we will express regret and update our forms." Linnea had signed it without comment. Linnea had read every study the Kalori had published on the Daggermaw. She had memorized the behavioral profiles, the territorial maps, the subsonic vocalization catalogs. She had spent 3 weeks in the station's archive room, cross-referencing 6 years of drone footage with thermal imaging data and geological surveys, building a map of the pack's movement patterns that Sareth later admitted was more detailed than anything the Kalori team had produced. And then she had done something that no Kalori researcher in 6 years of observation had attempted. She had gone outside. Not in an armored survey vehicle, not behind a perimeter fence, not through a drone feed. She had put on a thermal jacket, picked up her clipboard, walked down the stone terraces, and sat on a rock at the edge of the pack's territory. Sareth had been the one on duty that morning. She told Rithais about it with the clipped, slightly haunted tone of someone recounting a disaster that had not happened yet but should have. I activated the emergency extraction drone. I put the medical bay on standby. I opened a direct channel to the nearest Kalori military outpost, which is 14 hours away by fast shuttle, because I wanted them to know that in approximately 14 hours and 3 minutes, they would need to retrieve a human body. Then I watched. What was she doing? Sitting. She walked down to a flat rock at the edge of the pack's outer territorial boundary, a rock I had catalogued in our terrain survey 3 years ago and noted as a frequent scent marking site for the Alpha. She sat on it cross-legged, opened her journal, and began writing. She wrote the date, the temperature, the wind direction, the humidity. She wrote the GPS coordinates of her position and the estimated GPS coordinates of the pack den based on our survey data. She wrote all of this while sitting on a rock that smelled like Daggermaw Alpha, in a territory where no sentient being had sat unprotected in 6 years of continuous study. The first day, nothing happened. The second day, 3 juveniles watched Linnea from the ridgeline for an hour and left. The third day, a subadult approached within 10 meters, circled her twice, and retreated. The fourth day, the same subadult returned and sat down 8 meters away and stayed for 3 hours. On the 7th day, 2 juveniles sat on either side of the subadult. On the ninth day, the alpha's mate appeared on the ridge, watched for 40 minutes, and left without approaching. Linnea recorded everything: time, distance, posture, vocalizations. She did not move toward them. She did not offer food. She did not speak except in a low, steady murmur that she directed at her clipboard as though narrating her own notes. She sat and she waited, and she let the pack make every decision about proximity, duration, and contact. By the end of the second week, Sareth said, the juveniles were sitting within 5 meters. By the end of the third week, the subadult, the first one, the one that had circled her on day 3, was lying on the rock beside her, close enough that if she had extended her arm she could have touched it. She did not extend her arm. She wrote in her journal. The subadult watched her pen move. The Kalori research team watched through the observation corridor glass and tried to find a framework for what they were seeing. They had 6 years of data that said the Daggermaw's territorial aggression response was triggered at 50 meters for stationary biological signatures and 200 meters for moving ones. Their own observation protocols required a minimum distance of 300 meters, conducted from armored blinds with emergency extraction drones on standby. Linnea was sitting at 2 meters. The alpha was not exhibiting territorial aggression. The alpha was exhibiting what Sareth, in a field note that Rithais had read 3 times and still did not believe, had described as resting calm proximity tolerance, a behavioral state previously unrecorded in this species. That had been 5 months ago. What had happened since was the reason Rithais was here. "Walk me through it," he said to Sareth. "From the beginning." Sareth pulled up the timeline on her terminal. Month 1. The human establishes proximity habituation with the pack. Individual tolerance distances decrease from 50 meters to 2 meters over 23 days. No aggression events. No threat displays directed at the human. The pack begins treating her as a fixed element of the landscape, a rock, a thermal vent, a feature. Fine. Month 2. Physical contact. Sareth paused, as though she still had difficulty saying the words. The alpha's mate approached the human during a morning observation session and pressed its muzzle against the human's shoulder. Contact duration, 11 seconds. The human did not flinch. She recorded the event in her field notes as first tactile acknowledgement, uninitiated, voluntary, no-threat context. The alpha observed from 6 meters. No intervention. Physical contact with a Category 9 predator, and your team's response. Panic, professional disagreement. 3 formal objections filed with the station director. The station director forwarded the objections to the Frontier Bureau. The Bureau responded that the human's methodology was within her grant parameters and that the station was to facilitate her research. I drafted a risk assessment noting that the human was operating outside every safety protocol in the ministry's Category 9 handbook. The assessment was acknowledged and filed. Filed. Rithais exhaled through his crest vents. Continue. Month 3. The pack juveniles begin approaching the human independently. She records their individual behavioral patterns, assigns them identification codes, V1 through V7. She notes personality differences, preferred proximity distances, vocalization patterns. V3, the boldest of the juveniles, begins lying within arm's reach during every session. V5 and V6 position themselves on either side of her observation rock like sentries. She notes this in her journal but does not comment on it to us. The pack begins altering its movement schedule to coincide with her observation sessions. She sits at the same rock at the same time every morning. The pack arrives within 30 minutes. They are scheduling around her. Yes. I ran an analysis of the pack's movement data for the 3 months before Linnea's arrival and the 3 months after. Before her arrival, the pack's daily territorial circuit followed a pattern driven entirely by thermal output from the volcanic substrate. They moved to wherever the ground was warmest. After her arrival, the pattern shifted. They still follow the thermal gradient for the majority of the day, but their morning circuit now routes through the observation terraces between 600 and 900, the window when Linnea is at her rock. The deviation from their thermal optimal path is 400 meters. 400 meters of suboptimal territory every day to sit near a human with a clipboard. And there is more. By the end of month 3, the alpha begins accompanying the mate during Linnea's sessions. He does not approach as closely. He lies on the basking ledge, 6 to 8 meters behind her rock, but he is present every day. And his posture during these sessions is not territorial surveillance. It is not hunting rest. It is what our behavioral matrix classifies as protective overwatch, the same posture the alpha assumes when the juveniles are feeding in exposed terrain. He is not watching Linnea as a threat to be monitored. He is watching the terrain around Linnea as a threat to her. Month 3, the alpha was already guarding her. Yes, we did not fully understand the significance at the time. We do now. Month 4. The breeding female gives birth to 2 pups. Sareth's voice shifted something tighter, something that was not quite professional detachment. Daggermaw breeding events have been observed exactly twice in 6 years of monitoring, both times through long-range drone surveillance from distances exceeding 1 kilometer. The species is ferociously territorial during denning periods. Our protocols require a mandatory 400-meter exclusion zone around any detected den site. I sent Linnea a formal notification requiring her to suspend her observation sessions until the denning period concluded. And she read the notification. She asked how long the denning period typically lasted. I told her 4 to 6 weeks. She asked what data we had on maternal behavior during the denning period. I told her we had almost none. No researcher had ever been close enough to observe it. She went to her rock the next morning. Rethiza's crestridge twitched during an active denning period. I attempted to stop her. I stood in the terrace doorway and informed her that I would file a formal complaint with the Frontier Bureau if she proceeded. She told me she understood. Then she said something I have not been able to stop thinking about. What did she say? She said, "Dr. Sareth, every piece of data you have on this species was gathered from 300 meters through a drone lens. I am being offered something no one has ever been offered. If I do not go out there, that offer expires and it will not be made again." Then she walked past me. I filed the complaint. The Bureau acknowledged receipt and took no action. And you, what did you do? Sareth's secondary hands folded against her abdomen, the Kalori self-steadying gesture. I watched from the corridor. I had the extraction drone on standby. I had the medical bay staffed. And I watched a human woman sit on a rock during an active denning period of the most dangerous land predator on this continent. And I watched that predator bring its pups to her. And I understood in that moment that everything I had published in 11 years of peer-reviewed research about the Daggermaw's tolerance thresholds was wrong. Not slightly wrong, categorically wrong. I had been measuring the species' response to observers it considered threats. Linnea was not a threat. She was something else entirely, and I still do not have the vocabulary for what she is to them. And the pack's response. The human was sitting on her rock when the breeding female emerged from the den with the first pup in her jaws and carried it to a basking ledge 20 meters from the human's position. The human did not move. She recorded the event. The female returned with the second pup. Both pups were deposited on the basking ledge within visual and olfactory range of the human. The alpha was on overwatch. The juveniles had cleared the approach corridor and taken flanking positions along the ridge. The entire pack was in a configuration that we have never observed during any other denning event. What configuration? Open access. The den approach was unguarded on the side facing the human. Every other approach was covered. Commander, the pack was not tolerating Linnea's presence during their most vulnerable period. They were orienting their defenses around her. They had incorporated her into their protective formation. Rithais was quiet for a moment. Behind him, his security detail had stopped pretending they were not listening. "Dr. Sarath, you are telling me that a Category 9 apex predator chose to bring its newborn offspring to within 20 meters of a human. I am telling you what happened. What it means is outside my current theoretical framework." Sarath's Crestridges flattened the calorie equivalent of a deep breath. By month 5, the pups were approaching the human independently. They are now 4 months old. They sit at her feet during observation sessions. The smaller one, designation P2, has been observed sleeping against the human's leg on 3 occasions. The alpha tolerates this. The breeding female tolerates this. The entire pack tolerates this. She brought up a surveillance image on the terminal. Rithais leaned forward. The image showed Linnea Voss sitting on her rock, Clipboard on her knee, writing. The smaller Daggermaw pup was curled against her left boot, its muzzle resting on her ankle, its eyes closed. The larger pup sat 3 meters away, chewing on a piece of volcanic glass with the methodical intensity of a teething infant. Behind Linnea, at a distance of perhaps 6 meters, the alpha lay across the basking ledge with its massive skull resting on its foreclaws, one eye open, watching. Not watching Linnea, watching the ridgeline behind her, watching the approaches, watching for anything that might come from the direction of the station. Guarding her. "That is why I am here," Rithais said. "Yes. The ministry wants her removed. The order had come down 3 days ago." The Calorie Science Ministry's Risk Directorate had reviewed Sarath's monthly reports, the ones documenting a human female in unprotected daily contact with a Category 9 apex predator pack, including newborn pups, and had reached the conclusion that the liability exposure was unacceptable. If the human was killed, the diplomatic implications with Earth's representative council would be severe. If the human was not killed, but a Calorie staff member was emboldened by the human's apparent immunity to approach the Daggermaw themselves, the ministry would face internal review. If the pups imprinted on the human and the pack's social structure was altered, 6 years of non-interventionist observation data would be compromised. The ministry's solution was elegant and bureaucratic and had been drafted, Rithais was certain, by people who had never been closer to a Daggermaw than a surveillance screen, and whose primary concern was the color of the liability column in next quarter's risk report. Terminate the research grant, revoke the human station access, and have her transported off-world within 72 hours. The order made no mention of the pack. It made no mention of the pups. It classified the Daggermaw as ambient fauna in the operational summary, as though 7 meters of double-hinged jaw and skull plate were a weather condition to be noted and managed. Rithais had been sent to execute the order. He had a shuttle, a security detail, and paperwork signed by the directorate that authorized the use of reasonable measures to ensure compliance. He found Linnea at her rock that evening. The pack had retreated to the den as the temperature dropped. The Daggermaw were most active during the thermal peak hours when the volcanic substrate heated the rock terraces. The pups had been the last to leave. The smaller one, P2, had stayed at Linnea's feet until the breeding female had called it back with a low, subsonic pulse that Rithais felt in his sternum from 30 meters away. P2 had gone reluctantly, looking back twice before disappearing over the ridge. Linnea was writing in her field journal. Her thermal jacket was dusted with the fine black grit that the volcanic vents deposited on everything. Her hands were steady. Her face, in the thin light of the station's exterior lamps, was unremarkable, a woman in her mid-40s with sun-roughened skin, crow's feet at the corners of gray eyes, short brown hair going gray at the temples. She looked like someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors and had stopped caring about what that cost. "Dr. Voss." "Commander," she did not look up. "You're standing in the pack's approach corridor. If the Alpha comes back for a night check, he'll read you as an obstruction." Rithais glanced behind him. He saw nothing but dark rock and mist. He took 2 steps to the left. "Your grant has been revoked," he said. "The ministry has ordered your removal. You have 72 hours. Linea's pen stopped. She looked up. Her expression was not surprise, not anger. It was the flat, steady look of a person who had expected this and had already decided what she was going to do about it. "On what grounds?" "Liability, safety protocol violations, risk to ministry personnel and research continuity." "I have not violated any protocol. The grant parameters authorized non-invasive behavioral observation using proximity habituation. That is exactly what I have been doing." "You are sitting in physical contact with a Category 9 predator. That is not non-invasive." "I have never initiated contact. Every interaction has been initiated by the pack. I sit, they choose." "That is the methodology. The ministry does not recognize a distinction between initiated and uninitiated contact when a Category 9 species is involved. Then the ministry does not understand what it is observing." Rithai studied her. He had served 23 years in the Kalori Frontier Security Corps. He had decommissioned research stations, extracted compromised personnel, and enforced ministry directives on 17 worlds. He was not in the habit of being told what the ministry did or did not understand by a human sitting on a rock with a clipboard. But there was something in the way she said it, not defiance, not bluster. The quiet, absolute certainty of someone who had sat in the same place for 9 months and had seen something that the people giving orders from climate-controlled offices had not. "You have 72 hours, he said. "I would advise you to use them." "I intend to." She did not pack. She did not file an appeal. She did not contact Earth's representative council, though Sareth told Rithais that Linnea had the channel codes and the standing to do so. She went back to her rock in the morning and sat there as though nothing had changed. The pack arrived on schedule. The juveniles first, ranging along the ridgeline in a loose formation that Linnea had documented as their standard approach pattern. Then the subadults, V3 leading, angling toward its usual position beside Linnea's rock with the unhurried confidence of an animal that had claimed a spot and had no intention of giving it up. Then the alpha's mate, moving with the deliberate, ground-eating stride of a predator that had somewhere to be. The pups came with their mother, the larger one, P1, trotting ahead with its tail held high in the stiff-spined posture of juvenile confidence. The smaller one, P2, staying close to the female's flank with the careful steps of an animal that was still learning to trust the ground under its feet. Linnea recorded everything. She wrote in her field journal with the same unhurried hand she always used. When P2 reached her and settled against her boot, she lowered one hand slowly, without looking down, without altering the rhythm of her breathing, and rested her fingers on the ridge of immature bone plates along the pup's spine. The pup's eyes closed. Its breathing slowed. Sareth, watching through the corridor glass, recorded a cortisol reading from the remote biosensor array. P2's stress hormones were at the lowest level ever measured in a juvenile Daggermaw, lower than sleeping readings, lower than post-feeding readings. The pup was more relaxed in contact with the human than at any other recorded point in its life. Rithai stood beside Sareth and watched, and felt something shift in the calculus he had been running since he arrived on Verath 4. He had been sent to extract a liability. What he was watching through the glass was not a liability. It was a woman whose hand rested on a sleeping predator's spine with the unconscious gentleness of a mother checking a child's breathing, and a pup that had decided, with the absolute, uncomplicated certainty of a young animal, that the safest place on the planet was against her boot. He pushed the thought aside. He had orders. On the second day, Rithais sent his security officer, Lieutenant Dren, to deliver the formal extraction notice. Dren was Kalori broad-shouldered, crestridge permanently elevated from 12 years in frontier postings, carrying the particular rigid posture of someone who had been told to be polite, but had no talent for it. He walked down the stone terraces with the notice on his data tablet. He stopped at the edge of the approach corridor. Linnea had marked it with small cairns of volcanic stone, a system the Kalori team had quietly adopted after watching the Alpha respond to the boundaries, and called out, "Dr. Voss, formal extraction notice. You are required to acknowledge receipt." Linnea raised one hand without looking away from her journal. "Leave it on the cairn. I need a biometric confirmation." "Then you will need to come closer." Dren took 2 steps past the cairn line. The Alpha stood up. It had been lying on the basking ledge behind Linnea, invisible against the dark volcanic rock until it moved. One moment it was a geological feature. The next it was 7 meters of Category 9 apex predator, on its feet, its skull plate angled toward Dren, its jaw slightly open, its double-hinged mandible revealing the first row of shearing teeth. It did not growl. It did not vocalize. It simply stood and looked at the Kalori officer with both eyes, and every subsonic sensor on the station's array registered a pulse that the monitoring software flagged as Territorial Challenge Maximum Intensity. Dren froze. His crest ridge went flat, the involuntary submission response. His hand moved toward his sidearm. He stopped it. His training said draw. His body said do not move, because the thing looking at you has calculated the exact number of steps between you and safety, and it is fewer than the number of steps between you and your weapon. Linnea did not look up from her journal. "He will not hurt you," she said, her voice low and even, the same murmur she used when narrating her notes. "But you need to step back behind the cairn." Dren stepped back, 1 step, 2. The Alpha's jaw closed. It lowered itself back onto the basking ledge with the controlled, deliberate descent of something that did not need to hurry because it had already made its point. Its eye tracked Dren's retreat up the terraces, watching until the Kalori officer passed through the corridor door and the glass sealed behind him. Then it settled its skull onto its foreclaws and closed its eyes. P2, at Linnea's feet, had not stirred. The pup had slept through the entire exchange. It had not flinched at the Alpha's movement, had not woken at the subsonic pulse that had tripped every sensor on the station's grid. It had stayed asleep against the human's boot, because in its 4 months of life it had learned one absolute fact: nothing bad happened when she was there. Rithais was waiting in the corridor. Dren's face was the color of bleached stone. His crest ridge was still flat. His hands were shaking. "She is not coming voluntarily," Dren said. "That is apparent." "Commander, the Alpha positioned itself between her and my approach vector before I crossed the territorial marker. It was already in a defensive stance when I stopped moving. That animal was not reacting to a threat. It was anticipating one. It knew where I was going and it moved to block me before I got there." "I saw." It also did something else. When it stood up, the juveniles on the flanks shifted. V3 moved from its resting position beside her rock to a position 3 meters upslope between the human and the next nearest approach from the east terrace. V5 and V6 closed the gap on the western side. The subadults dropped lower, tightening the perimeter. The entire pack reconfigured around her in less than 2 seconds. They were not panicking. They were not scattering. They were executing a defensive formation. Rithais looked through the glass. Linnea was still on her rock. The pup was still at her feet. The Alpha was still on the basking ledge. The juveniles had resettled to their previous positions. The formation dissolved as smoothly as it had formed. Nothing about the scene had changed, except that now 3 Kalori soldiers in the corridor understood something that Linnea's clipboard had been recording for 9 months. The pack knew who she was, not as a feature of the landscape, not as a tolerated observer. She was theirs. On the 3rd morning, the ministry sent new orders. If the human would not comply voluntarily, Rithais was authorized to deploy a sonic perimeter to drive the pack back from the observation terraces and extract her during the window. Standard predator aversion protocol. The same technology used on 6 other rewilding zones and research stations across Kalori space. Rithais read the order. He read it again. Then he called Sareth into the corridor. If I activate a sonic perimeter around the terraces, what happens to the pack? Sareth's 4 hands went still. The Daggermaw communicate through subsonic vocalization. A sonic perimeter at the frequencies required to trigger aversion would overlap with their communication band. At minimum, it would cause disorientation, stress response, and disrupted pack coordination. The adults would scatter. The juveniles would bolt. The subadults would likely enter panic flight, which in this terrain means running blind across volcanic fissure fields. Injuries or fatalities are probable. And the pups? The pups are 4 months old. Their auditory structures are still developing. A sustained sonic pulse at that frequency and intensity could cause permanent damage to their subsonic reception organs. They would lose the ability to hear pack vocalizations. In a social species that coordinates hunting, denning, and pup rearing through subsonic communication, that is a death sentence. They would grow into adults unable to locate their pack, unable to participate in coordinated hunts, unable to hear the alarm calls that warn of geological instability. They would be functionally exiled from their own species. Can we modulate the frequency to avoid the pup's range? No, the aversion frequencies and the juvenile auditory development frequencies are the same band. There is no gap to thread. Rithais stood at the glass. Below, Linnea was at her rock. The morning mist was thick, pooling in the valley below the ridgeline, turning the volcanic terraces into islands of dark stone floating in white. The pack was arriving. He could see the juveniles on the ridge, their basalt-dark hides moving against the mist like shadows with weight. P2 was already at Linnea's feet. She knows, Sareth said quietly. She has studied the species' auditory biology more thoroughly than any Kalori researcher on the station, myself included. She published a paper on primate vocalization sensitivity in her previous fieldwork. She mapped our subsonic equipment's frequency output against the Daggermaw's communication band in her 2nd month here. She knows exactly what a sonic perimeter would do to the pups. Has she said anything about it? No, she does not need to. Watch what she is doing. Rithais watched. Linnea was not at her usual rock. She had moved 30 meters down the terraces, closer to the den entrance, closer to the ridgeline, deeper into the pack's territory than she had ever positioned herself. She had brought a 2nd clipboard, her backup, the one Sareth said she kept in her quarters for rain days, and she was writing in both, alternating between them, cross-referencing observations with a focused efficiency that looked, from the corridor, like someone who knew she might not have many sessions left and was determined to record everything she could. The Alpha was not on the basking ledge. The Alpha was 5 meters behind her, lying across the approach path that led from the station down to the terraces. Its skull was facing the station. Its jaw was slightly open. Its eyes were fixed on the observation corridor glass with an expression that Rithais, who had spent his career reading alien body language, could only describe as deliberate. It was not guarding the terraces from predators. It was guarding Linnea from the station. She repositioned to the den perimeter, Sareth said. If you deploy the sonic perimeter at the standard radius around the station, she is outside it, inside the pack's territory, inside the den's exclusion zone. Any attempt to extract her physically would require crossing the Alpha's guard position, and any attempt to expand the sonic radius to reach her would mean deploying the emitters directly into the denning area, which would guarantee pup exposure. She is using herself as a shield. She is sitting with her clipboard doing what she has done every morning for 9 months. The pack has made its own decision about where to position its defenses. She did not command the Alpha to guard the approach. She sat down. The Alpha decided the rest. Rithais made a decision. If the subordinate had failed, the commander would go himself. He was not a man who delegated failure. "Give me the data tablet," he said to Dren. "I will deliver the notice personally." Dren's Crestridge attempted to elevate and failed. "Commander, the Alpha. I am not going to cross the cairn line. I will call to her from the boundary. She can acknowledge from where she sits." He took the tablet and walked down the terraces. The volcanic stone was warm under his boots. The thermal venting from the substrate gave the terraces a steady ambient heat that made the morning mist coil and shred against the dark rock. He could smell the Daggermaw before he saw them, a dense, mineral copper scent that Sareth's reports attributed to the species' elevated blood temperature, and the iron-rich sebaceous oils that kept their hide waterproof in the volcanic humidity. He stopped at the cairn line. He did not step past it. He held the tablet in front of him and called out in a voice pitched to carry without shouting. "Dr. Voss, this is Commander Rithies. I am delivering a formal extraction notice. You are required to acknowledge receipt." Linnea looked up from her journal. She was 30 meters away. Between them, the Alpha lay across the approach path like a wall of black stone and dark red vein lines. Its skull facing Rithies. Its jaw closed, but its mandible muscles visibly tensed the pre-opening position that Sareth's biomechanics papers described as strike-ready at rest. "Leave it on the cairn, Commander. I need verbal acknowledgement for the record." "You have it. I acknowledge receipt. I do not acknowledge the authority of the order." "The authority is not yours to acknowledge or reject. The Ministry has jurisdiction over this station and all personnel operating under its grants." "I am not rejecting the Ministry's jurisdiction. I am telling you that if you execute this order, you will destroy 9 months of work that cannot be replicated, damage or kill 2 juvenile Daggermaw, and trigger a pack response that will put every person on the station at risk. That is not an opinion. That is a behavioral projection based on 9 months of direct observation data that your ministry has been reading in Dr. Sareth's reports and choosing to ignore." Her voice had not risen. Her posture had not changed. She was sitting cross-legged on volcanic rock with a sleeping pup against her boot and a clipboard on her knee, and she was delivering a tactical briefing to a Kalori security commander with the same steady, unhurried tone she used to narrate field observations about juvenile proximity behavior. Behind her, the Alpha's jaw cracked open 1 centimeter. A low sound emerged, not quite a growl, not quite a vocalization, something deeper, something that lived in the subsonic range and traveled through the rock itself. Rithies felt it in his knee joints before he heard it. The stone under his feet hummed. V3, beside Linnea's rock, lifted its head, its amber eyes fixed on Rithies. It did not stand. It did not need to. Its gaze was enough the flat, unhurried assessment of a predator that was comfortable where it was and was calculating whether it needed to become uncomfortable. Rithies looked at the Alpha. He looked at V3. He looked at the 2 juveniles on the flanks who had shifted their weight forward onto their foreclaws, not standing, not crouching, but loading their muscles for the transition between lying still and moving very fast. He looked at the breeding female on the ridge, who had turned her full attention from the corridor glass to him, her bone crest now fully elevated, her jaw slightly parted. He looked at Linnea, who had resumed writing in her journal. He set the data tablet on the cairn. He walked back up the terraces. He did not run. He wanted to. Back in the corridor, Dren was waiting with the expression of someone who had just watched his commanding officer learn something the hard way. "The pack read your intent before you spoke," Dren said. "I am aware. The Alpha's subsonic pulse started when you raised the tablet, not when you spoke, when you raised the object." "I said I am aware, Lieutenant." "Commander, if we activate the sonic perimeter and the pups are damaged, the pack's response will not be proportional." "Go on." "Daggermaw pack vengeance behavior. Dr. Sareth's reports document it. When a pack member is harmed, the pack does not scatter. It converges. Every individual in the pack moves toward the source of the harm. The response is coordinated, sustained, and it does not end until the threat is eliminated or the pack is dead. There are no half measures. There are no retreats. This is the species that killed 47 armed miners in 6 months. The miners had sonic deterrence. They had kinetic weapons. They had armored vehicles. The Daggermaw went through all of it. The station's structural rating. Designed for Category 7 atmospheric events. A coordinated assault by a full Category 9 pack alpha, mate, 7 juveniles, 4 subadults would breach the exterior walls in under 3 minutes. We tested the scenario in simulation on the transport. I ran it twice. The station fails both times. We have the shuttle. The shuttle is 200 meters from the Alpha's current position. The Alpha can cover 200 meters in under 4 seconds. The shuttle's ramp takes 6 seconds to seal. Silence in the corridor. The kind of silence that happens when arithmetic settles a question that authority could not. Rithais looked through the glass one more time. The mist was lifting. The morning light caught the volcanic terraces and threw long shadows across the dark stone. Linnea was writing in her journal. P2 was curled against her boot. The larger pup, P1, was sitting 4 meters away, gnawing on a piece of volcanic glass with the methodical intensity of a teething infant. 2 juveniles flanked the approach on either side, lying flat against the rock with their eyes on the station. V3 was beside Linnea's rock, its muzzle resting on its foreclaws, its amber eyes half closed in the patient stillness of a predator that was not hunting but was very much awake. The Alpha was behind her, massive and still and patient, its skull plate catching the light like hammered iron. The breeding female was on the ridge above the den, watching the corridor glass, watching Rithais. Her crest of bone was raised not fully, not a threat display, but the held elevation of a mother who has identified where the danger is and is measuring its distance from her children. The pack was not hiding. It was not fleeing. It was arranged in a formation that Linnea had not organized and had not directed. She sat in the center with her clipboard and her pen, and around her 7 meters of alpha behind, juveniles on the flanks, the mate on high ground, subadults tightening the perimeter, and 2 pups at her feet. The most dangerous pack predator on the planet had drawn a line that said, "She is ours, and you will not take her." Rithais sent his report to the ministry that evening. He did not recommend extraction. He did not recommend the sonic perimeter. He recommended that the ministry extend the research grant for an additional 12 months, reclassify the human's methodology from non-invasive observation to integrated behavioral study, and assign 2 additional calorie researchers to assist Dr. Voss in documenting what was, in his assessment, the most significant xenofaunal behavioral event in the ministry's 60-year history. He attached Dren's tactical assessment. He attached Sareth's auditory damage projection. He attached the simulation results showing the station's failure under pack assault. He attached the surveillance image of Linnea on her rock with the pup at her feet, and the Alpha at her back, and the pack arrayed around her like a living perimeter. The ministry's response arrived in 4 hours. It was curt. It reminded him that his assignment was extraction, not recommendation. It reiterated the 72-hour timeline, which now had 18 hours remaining. It noted that his report contained subjective language unbecoming of a security assessment. He deleted the response and sent a second report. This one was shorter. I have assessed the tactical situation on the ground. Extraction of the human researcher Dr. Linnea Voss by force or deterrent is not operationally viable without unacceptable risk to ministry personnel, station infrastructure, and the Daggermaw population. The pack has adopted the human as a protected member. It has positioned defensive assets around her that exceed the capability of my security detail to safely overcome. She is not in danger from the pack. The pack is in danger from us. Recommend stand down, extend the grant, learn from what she is doing. If the ministry overrides this assessment and orders extraction by force, I will require that order in writing, with the personal signature of the director, because I intend to present it at the inquiry that will follow when this station is torn apart by a pack of Category 9 predators defending the one person on this planet that they trust. The ministry did not respond for 36 hours. Rithai spent those 36 hours in the observation corridor, watching Linnea work. He watched her record the juveniles' hunting practice on the lower terraces, 3 of them stalking a colony of rock hares that lived in the fissures below the ridgeline, their movements coordinated by subsonic pulses that the station's equipment rendered as jagged waveforms on Sareth's terminal. He watched P2 fall asleep against Linnea's boot at 7:30, wake at 9:40, spend 20 minutes chewing on a bone fragment, fall asleep again at 10:15. He watched the Alpha lie on the basking ledge for 9 hours without changing position, its one open eye tracking every movement within 100 meters of Linnea's rock. He watched Linnea fill 31 pages of her field journal in a single day. She did not look at the station. She did not look at the corridor glass. She wrote and she sat, and once at midday, when the volcanic venting sent a plume of warm mineral-scented air across the terraces, she closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the warmth, and the pup at her feet did the same thing at the same moment, and Rithai saw something that he could not have put in any report. 2 creatures, entirely different in every biological particular, performing the same gesture of simple animal comfort at the same time, not because one was mimicking the other, but because they had spent enough time together that the rhythm of their days had synchronized. When the ministry's response finally came, the extraction order was rescinded. The grant was extended. Rithai's was reassigned. The official record stated that the reassignment was routine. The unofficial record, which Dren told him about 2 months later over a drink on Calori Prime, stated that 3 members of the Risk Directorate had asked to see the surveillance footage of the Alpha standing up, and that one of them had not spoken for the rest of the meeting. A second had asked, very quietly, whether the human had been offered a permanent research appointment. A third had stared at the freeze frame of P2 sleeping against Linnea's boot and said, "We were going to deploy sonic emitters into a den with pups." Nobody had answered him. The meeting had ended shortly after. Before he left, Rithai went down to the terraces one last time. He stopped at the cairn line and waited. Linnea looked up from her journal. "Your grant has been extended," he said, 12 months. "The ministry is sending 2 additional researchers." She nodded once. Her pen resumed. "Tell them to bring clipboards, not digital recorders." "I will pass that along." He stood there for another moment, watching the scene he had spent 3 days trying to dismantle. The pup at her feet, the Alpha at her back, V3 beside her rock, its muzzle on its foreclaws, watching Rithai with an amber eye that held no malice and no welcome, only the steady assessment of an animal that had decided, months ago, where it belonged and would not be moved. The pack arranged around her in a formation that had no name in any military doctrine he had ever studied, but that he recognized immediately, because the language of protection is the same in every species that practices it. "Dr. Voss." "Commander." "How did you know? That first day when you walked out to the rock, how did you know it would not kill you?" She was quiet for a long time. The pen moved. The pup shifted against her boot. The Alpha opened one eye, looked at Rithai with the flat, patient assessment of a creature that had decided he was no longer a threat, and closed it again. "I didn't," she said, "but I knew that if I sat still long enough and stayed quiet long enough and never asked for anything eventually, they would decide I was worth keeping." She looked at him then, and for the first time in 3 days he saw something behind the clinical steadiness. Not warmth, exactly, something fiercer. The look of a woman who had spent 9 months earning the trust of creatures that could kill her in a heartbeat, and who had just watched a government try to destroy that trust with a memo. and who had sat on her rock and let the pack decide what to do about it. Because she knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who has spent a lifetime sitting still with dangerous animals, that the pack's answer would be louder than any order the ministry could write. "They are not specimens, Commander," she said. "They are a family, and families protect each other." Behind her the Alpha rumbled. Low, subsonic, felt more than heard, a vibration that moved through the volcanic rock and up through Rithai's boots and settled somewhere in his chest where language did not reach. The pup at Linea's feet stirred, yawned, and pressed its muzzle deeper against her ankle. The juveniles on the flanks shifted, resettling, their eyes on the ridgeline and the mist and everything beyond the cairn line that was not Linea. Rithai nodded. He turned and walked back up the terraces. Behind him, the quiet sounds of the morning continued, pen on paper, the click of volcanic glass under juvenile teeth, the low, steady breathing of a woman and her pack. At the top of the terraces, he paused. The observation corridor glass reflected the scene below in muted blues and grays, the dark stone, the mist, the small figure at the center of it all. Dren was waiting. "Orders, Commander." "Pack the shuttle. We are leaving." "And Dr. Voss?" Rithai looked through the glass one last time. Linea was writing. The pup was sleeping. The Alpha was watching the ridgeline with the steady, unhurried vigilance of something that had nowhere else to be and no one else to guard. "She is exactly where she belongs." 3 years later, Commander Rithai received a research publication forwarded by the Ministry's Science Division. It was authored by Dr. Linea Voss, Dr. Ian Sarath, and 2 Kalori researchers whose names he did not recognize. It was titled, "Sustained Non-Agonistic Integration in Daggermaw Pack Structures, 9-year longitudinal study of cross-species bond formation on Verath 4. He read the abstract, he read the methodology section, he read the results. He read the appendices, which included thermal imaging composites, subsonic vocalization spectrograms, and 37 pages of behavioral observation, logs written in Linea's handwriting that someone had scanned and included as supplementary material. P2, the pup that had slept against Linea's boot, was now a subadult, 2.5 meters long, with a fully developed skull plate and a jaw pressure rating that the equipment had declined to measure because the calibration rig buckled before the reading completed. Its hide had darkened from the soft charcoal of juvenile coloring to the deep basalt black of an adult, veined with the same dark red thermal lines as the Alpha. Its double-hinged jaw had come in at full development, and the paper noted that its shearing teeth were among the largest recorded for the species, a genetic inheritance from the Alpha. It had the Alpha's build, low-slung, dense, designed for speed through narrow terrain, but something in its posture, in the way it carried its skull slightly tilted toward Linea's position even in resting photographs, was different from any other Daggermaw in the study population. The researchers had a term for it in the paper's behavioral lexicon, oriented stillness. The animal was always, at some level, pointed toward her. The researchers had observed P2 positioning itself between Linea and unfamiliar Kalori visitors on 37 separate occasions. It responded to her voice at distances exceeding 500 meters. It slept within 3 meters of her field position every night. It had been observed, twice, carrying a dead rock hare to the flat stone where she sat and depositing it at her feet with the careful, deliberate placement of a creature bringing food to a pack member who could not hunt for herself. The paper included a section on pack defensive behavior. It documented 11 instances in which the pack had formed a protective perimeter around Linea in response to perceived threats, visiting researchers who moved too quickly, atmospheric survey drones that strayed too close, a geological tremor that destabilized the terrace below her rock. In every instance, the formation was the same. Alpha behind, juveniles on the flanks, breeding female on high ground, subadults tightening the perimeter, and P2 at her feet, pressed against her boot, asleep through it all. The paper's final paragraph contained a line that Sareth had written, and that Rithais read 4 times. The Daggermaw pack does not distinguish between Dr. Voss and its biological members for the purposes of protective response. In behavioral terms, she is pack. The implications for xenofaunal social bonding research are significant. The implications for our understanding of what the Daggermaw are, and what they are capable of recognizing in a species entirely unlike their own, are larger than this paper can contain. Rithais sat in his office on Calori Prime and stared at the image embedded in the paper. Linnea Voss, 3 years older, a little grayer, still in the same thermal jacket, sitting on her rock. P2, no longer small enough to curl against a boot, lying beside her with its massive skull resting on its foreclaws, its eyes half closed in the deep calm of an animal that had grown up against a human's ankle and had never found a reason to leave. The alpha graying now too, slower, with a slight hitch in its left forelimb that the paper attributed to age, lying on the basking ledge behind her. The same formation, the same positions, 3 years and the pack had not moved. The station had grown, more researchers, better equipment, a proper medical facility. Linnea had not moved. She sat, they stayed. He closed the publication and looked out his office window at the city below. Clean lines, ordered traffic, the managed geometry of a civilization that controlled everything it touched. He thought about a woman on a volcanic rock with a clipboard, and a creature that had decided, with the absolute certainty of something that had never needed to read a regulation or sign a document or file a report, that she was worth dying for. He thought, we sent an extraction team, and the pack sent an answer. He thought the answer was better. On his desk, half buried under requisition forms, was a small object he had brought back from Verath 3 years ago. A piece of volcanic glass, smooth and dark, the kind the pups had chewed on while Linnea wrote in her journal. He had picked it up from the terrace on his last walk back from the cairn line. He did not know why he had kept it. He did not examine the impulse. He picked it up now. It was warm in his palm. Calori Prime's climate control kept his office at a steady temperature, but the glass seemed to hold heat the way the volcanic terraces had, as though it remembered where it came from. He set it back down, closed the publication, and went home. Outside his window, the city hummed with the quiet industry of a civilization that managed everything. Somewhere on a volcanic ridge on a planet 14 hours away, a woman sat on a rock with a clipboard, and a creature that the galaxy called a monster slept at her feet and called her pack. Some things, Rithais thought, did not fit in the ministry's filing system. Some things were not meant to.